The white-clad nobles fight is the first example of the art team really showing their talents. Having this angelic figure with a twisted expression battle you in the calm, overgrown swamp is a magnificent contrast that gives the battle an ironic serenity. His dashing attack, where he begins by distancing himself and turning, is a really fair tell, yet his supersonic return trip still requires precise timing, which is a nice balance of challenge and fairness for a boss this early in the game. I find it interesting that a game that so heavily prioritizes weaving under your opponent's feet and chipping away at their health would include a boss so early on whose primary attacks all involve him creating distance from you just to instantly close the gap. Now, while giving bosses second hidden health bars should be punishable by death, White-clad Noble keeps his attack patterns quite similar between phases. He just adds a few more ranged attacks, but the same strategy for beating him applies. See, it's only when I have to beat one boss just so I can begin learning the phases of the second boss that the second health bar makes me seethe in agony, but Black Myth as a whole doesn't pull that trick too often, and White-clad Noble is a great example of how to do a secret second phase right. Next is the final boss of Chapter 1, Black Bear Gwai. This is the first boss in the game that towers over you and has a cinematic flair, as the arena burns around you, transforming the tranquil forest into an apocalyptic nightmare. And the bear is able to match the intensity of his arena. He charges wildly around the battlefield, and since this is still the early game, his tells are easily readable, and he mainly attacks by slamming the ground with small gaps in between each one. His most annoying attack is a punish for implementing the tried and true strategy of getting behind the boss and wailing on them, as he has an extremely fast backflop move which always caught me off guard and made me hit him from the front so I could more easily dodge. The second phase is where the fight gets really interesting, as he gains a wind form that makes him invulnerable. Now, this attack is dull because you have to focus solely on defense, and it's not a hectic barrage of dodges, so it's more of a pace killer. But when he comes out of that form with flaming claws, he catches you off guard with an impressive range and a burn bane effect, becoming far more ferocious and aggressive in his attack patterns, which finally let him match the intensity of the arena the fight takes place in. The added range is a great betrayal of his design, as with these huge monsters you don't expect them to have ranged attacks, so the bear compensates by closing the distance between you, devastating you with a monstrous assault. Next is the Tiger Vanguard, and goddamn, this art team knows how to make an arena epic. The grotesque pool of coagulated blood is the perfect way to communicate the boss's savagery and violence, showing us that the tiger is a vile creature who literally bathes in carnage. The tiger is one of the most aggressive bosses in the game. He barely gives you a chance to heal, and you'll be hard pressed to get a full combo off on him as he relentlessly attacks, which is what makes this boss fight much more demanding than most. Even though there are far more punishing foes deeper into the experience, the Tiger Vanguard still remains as one of the most unrelenting bosses, not giving the player a moment to readjust when something goes awry. This is balanced by his lack of long-ranged attacks, and how when he's about to close the distance, the attacks have a slow motion read in order to make sure the player is fully prepared to dodge. He even has a troll move where he encases himself in stone to make you think you have a free heal, just for an illusion to zip across the battlefield and wipe you out, which is a pretty cheap move, game science. What especially makes this boss so deadly is the variety of his attacks. At this point in the game, you won't have encountered an enemy with this many different ways of eviscerating you, giving you several timings you have to learn, while earlier bosses only had 5 or so attack patterns. The final boss I want to discuss is the Buddha's right hand, which is how you do a gimmick boss so well. I know I've harped on about arenas for every boss, but they are such a big part of what makes a boss fight so great, and the right hand uses its arena in a genius way. See, the thing that can make or break a boss for me is when I don't have enough space to move around and dodge attacks. In Black Myth Wukong, dodging is the only game in town, so it's normally generous with its arena sizes. Except for the Buddha's right hand, which is a boss fight designed solely around its narrow battlefield, expertly betraying the player's instinct to attack it right after it stops moving by dropping a boulder on their head. While I normally despise teleporting bosses, The right hand uses that teleportation as part of its attacks, as the battle becomes about closing the distance between the foe, as the hand volleys ranged attacks down the corridor. Once the novelty of the hand wears off, it transforms into a far more beastly appearance with a nice meaty hitbox for you to wail on. Black Myth Wukong is honestly saved by its boss fights, as everything else about the game feels dull, but when you do step into an arena against these challenging foes, the dodge-based combat truly flourishes. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about why the skin suit in Stellar Blade is difficulty design genius.